Hello. We're continuing our study on birth order. Discussion about birth order started over a century ago in our secular world, but you know what? We can trace it in the Bible all the way back to Genesis, to their firstborn sons, Cain and Abel. Birth order affects us and all that we are doing, and we're going to be exploring it from a biblical perspective by examining people in the Bible. Last week we talked about some of those firstborn people. Cain, who we know was the firstborn of the firstborns. Aaron, well, he was a middle child who actually, because he was the firstborn son, had a lot of firstborn qualities. And then Joseph. Today, in our society, there are so many blended families. It didn't just start today, though. That also started back in the Bible times. And we see Joseph, who was not Jacob's firstborn son, but actually he was the firstborn in a blended family. So he was Rachel's firstborn son. And as we remember this, we have to remember that all general statements are only indicators and not rules. And we see how that birth order and personalities together affected them in every way, and they made them all different. Today, we're going to look at the middle child, or the second-born child. But first, let's talk about what is birth order. Birth order, simply put, is the order in which a child is born into a certain family. A family of 3, for example. The very oldest one would be the firstborn. The next child would be the second-born or the middle child, and the third child would be the last-born or the baby of the family. Now, that sounds very easy, and we should be able to just go through and say, this is what a family's like. However, it does not always work that way. You see, what happens is many times there's not just 3 children. There might be odd numbers, 2, 4, 6. And sometimes the second-born will also have qualities of the middle child, even if there are only 2 children. So we're going to be looking today at a couple of those examples. The first one will be the middle child, the middle of 3. Now, because the Bible has to do with families and individuals, we don't have a lot of examples of what the middle of 3 is like. But Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, does give us a very great example. Mary's introduced when she and Martha have invited Jesus into their home. Jesus is there for dinner, and the very first time we hear Mary's name mentioned is when Martha, the oldest, is complaining to Jesus about Mary, saying, make her help. Here we have the firstborn who is bustling about trying to get everything done. And the secondborn is doing what secondborns do. They are being completely opposite of the firstborn child. If Martha's going to be the hard worker and get everything done, then Mary, the secondborn, is going to spend time in relationships. That's what she wants to do. That's what secondborns do the best. They love relationships. They love people. And while she is there with Jesus, Martha is getting very upset. And sometimes the secondborn, the middle child, has a way of getting under the skin of the firstborn child, and we see that happening here. Later, when their baby brother Lazarus gets sick, Mary and Martha appeal to Jesus. And Jesus, who's their friend and who the Bible says loves them, doesn't come. Instead, he sends a message. And what happens? Lazarus dies. Well, Mary is in the house when we see her, while Martha's outside. Mary is surrounded by her friends. And often the firstborn and the secondborn will even have different friends. As a firstborn child, Mary's friends will normally be a smaller group than the middle child. Mary has a lot of friends, more friends than their siblings, because relationships to peers is very, very important. They want relationships and they want loyalty. And it usually will even outrank their family ties. When Mary went to see Jesus, her friends think that she's going to the tomb to cry again. And so they follow along. So not only we see is she loyal to her friends, but because of her ability to get along with anyone, they're loyal to her. The middle children just attract people. People like the middle child because they're so nice and even steady going usually. When Mary sees Jesus, her first response is, "Jesus, if you had been here, he would not have died." Probably the most important thing for a middle child is fairness. And it wasn't fair that her friend, who could have done something, did not come to her in the hour of need. He helped all the other people. He healed many. Death could not be in his presence, and she knew that, yet he did not come. And it upset her. It hurt her. These are the only words that are recorded by Mary in the Bible. The middle child is often shy and quiet, and they're the ones in the family who have a lot of friends, and they may talk to their friends, but unless they're really pushed, they don't tell their friends or their family how they really feel about what's going on. And for Mary to even say, "Jesus, if you had been here," that's kind of out of character for the middle child, because the middle children, they don't want to blame people out loud, and they don't want to cause anything that will disrupt the peace. And so if you're talking to a middle child, you can trust them with your secrets. They're not ones that are going to tell your secrets any more than they will tell you their secrets, unless you're asked them, unless you push, and unless they know they can trust you. The middle child will lead a quiet life with a lot of thoughts and a lot of thinking. Sometimes it might just be because they have talkative parents or talkative siblings, and growing up they didn't have the opportunity to talk that much, or maybe sometimes it's because growing up their opinions were overlooked, and so they just got used to not expressing them. Middle children are not known, though, for holding grudges. And later, when we see Mary and Jesus, they've made up, and Mary is there again at the feet of Jesus, and she is pouring out this costly ointment on his feet, and Judas does not like it. She's the center of attention, which most middle children do not like to be, although we've got them on this side, and on the other extreme, we've got the ones who did not get the attention at home, so they'll get it elsewhere, maybe even by becoming the class clown. And so they either avoid attention or they crave attention. And they prefer often the background. Mary is usually found in the background and not even speaking, but letting her actions speak for her. And so when Judas rebukes her, Mary doesn't speak up. She allows Jesus to speak up for her. And wanting things to be fair, as we've already mentioned, and wanting to keep the peace are the two most important things to the middle child. Wanting to keep the peace sometimes comes at a very high price, as we'll see at the life of Jacob, who's the second-born child. It's been said that siblings share genes, but very rarely personalities. Well, this was certainly true of Jacob and his older twin Esau. Their parents had waited 20 years for their arrival. And on the day of their birth, excitement was everywhere. And as the children grew, Jacob, the proud father, chose Esau as his favorite. But the mother, Rebekah, favored her son Jacob. And this often happens with a second-born. A second-born will often be attracted to the parent who is of their opposite sex. Like a girl would be the favorite of the father, or in this case, a boy the favorite of the mother. And the middle child, we can always say, will be different from their firstborn, not just in what they like, but also in their abilities. The Bible says that Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, a dweller in tents. The second child will try to get ahead of, or as the term has been coined, dethrone the first child. And Jacob wanted to dethrone Esau. He wanted to get ahead of him. One day, when Esau came in from a very unsuccessful hunting trip, he was famished. And there was Jacob, cooking that lentil soup that he was famous for. And the aroma of it just filled the area. Esau said, "Give me some of that." Jacob said, "No, this is mine." And Esau says, "Look, I'm dying." And Jacob says, "What will you trade me? I'll take your birthright for my soup." The middle child is a great negotiator. They know how to bargain and they know how to negotiate. And this was the very first time that we saw Jacob put those skills into action. Later on, Isaac decides that he's going to bless his older child. Well, things don't go very well. His mother convinced him to take his brother's blessing through lying and deceit. Rather than confront her, his desire to keep the peace caused Jacob to follow her instructions. And as he did this, and he lied to his father by deceiving him and making him think that he was his older brother Esau, it caused his brother, who already had hard feelings against him, to actually hate him. Then, to protect Jacob from Esau, Rebekah and Isaac sent Jacob back to her father's house. And she said, "There you'll find your wife. You'll be safe." Leaving home, going far away from home even, is not unusual for the middle child. The firstborn, the baby, they like to stay at home. But the middle child, they'll go out on their own. They're the ones who leave home first and stay there once they're gone. And while they love their parents, and usually their other siblings, to lesser or greater degrees, their new families and their own children become the most important things to him. On his way to his new home, Jacob has an encounter with God. He has a dream. And in this dream, God promises that he will keep him, that he will bless him, and that he'll give the land to his descendants. Jacob awakes. He realizes that he has had a one-on-one encounter with God. And what does he do? Rather than just praise and worship the Lord, he makes a bargain with God. True second-born fashion. And what does he say? He says, "If God will be with me and protect me and bring me back here," in other words, God, you do what you said you'd do, and this is what I'll do in return. Then if you do all of that, and also if you'll bring me back in peace, I'm going to set up a pillar and I'm going to worship you right here. Oh yeah, and I'll even give you 10% of my income. Middle children negotiate everything. They want the very best. Well, Jacob continues to his destination and meets his mother's brother. And now he's found someone who's a match for his negotiating skills. And this is very surprising because usually the middle child knows how to read other people very well. They have the ability to tell whether a person is really true and really saying what they mean. And when Laban asked what his wages should be, he says, I'll serve you 7 years for your daughter Rachel. He'd already fallen in love with her and wanted to marry her, and he patiently waited those 7 years before he married her. You see, middle child, second-borns, have a great deal of patience. They're probably the only birth order that would wait that long for that prize. And he agrees. Laban says, sure, I'll do it. The only thing is, at the end of the 7 years, Jacob, who has deceived and tricked his brother, is now being deceived and tricked. On his wedding night, he finds out he did not get the beautiful Rachel for whom he'd worked 7 years. Instead, he got his sister. Yep, there was Leah, the older sister of Rachel. Oh, Jacob was outraged. And he would have left her right then. I mean, he called out to Laban, except a couple of things. First of all, Laban said, well, it's not the way of the custom. It's not right around here for the younger daughter to be married before the older daughter. Jacob realized that's fair. I can live with that. That's fair. And the second thing was Jacob wanted to keep peace in this family at any price, and he was willing to do whatever it cost to keep peace. And thirdly, he had just married Leah the night before. The middle child is the one that will stay in a relationship longer than any other child. Even if it's an abusive situation, even if it's a terrible situation, because of the vows that they have made, because they realize how important a family is to them, they'll do whatever they can to keep it intact. So, after his honeymoon with Leah was over, he took Rachel, and he worked another 7 years for her. Now, Rachel is also a middle child, second born. She has this older sister. And when she sees that Leah is having children and she's not, Rachel thinks that's not fair. And she complains to her husband Jacob and says, give me children or I die. Well, Jacob realizes this is one thing he can't control and that the situation is out of his hand. And he says, who am I? I'm not God. I can't do this. And so God is the one that has withheld them. And so Rachel then, in her negotiating ways, decides that she's going to give Jacob her handmaid so that he can have more children by her, since she can't at that time. And Jacob, who loves children and wants as big a family as possible, he agrees. And it's not until Jacob has 10 other sons and a daughter that Rachel finally conceives. And then Jacob's favorite son is born. But even when the favorite son is born, Rachel is not content with her sister being ahead. And so what does she do? She called his name Joseph and said, this is the meaning of Joseph, God shall add to me another son. She was never satisfied with just one. God had given her one, but she was a second-born. She wanted to go ahead. She wanted to push ahead. She wanted to try to overtake and completely dethrone her own sister Leah. After the birth of Joseph, Jacob calls Rachel and Leah to him. He's worked an additional, he worked 7 years and 7 years, and now he's worked another 6 years. And he realized that Laban's not happy with him. So he calls his two wives. He said, I can tell your dad's not happy with me. I have got possessions. I have cattle. I have herds. I have servants. I have you. I have the family. And now God has directed me back to my homeland. God has told me to go back home. What do you think? You see, even though God had spoken to Jacob, Jacob was not willing to leave his family. He wanted to preserve peace. He wanted to keep his family intact. And that was so very important to him. Well, later on, years later, when his daughter Dinah was raped and Levi and Simeon even committed murder to defend her honor, Jacob did not harshly punish them or turn his back on them because he wanted to keep his family intact. That was so important. But now here's Laban. Laban sees how wealthy this man is. And that's one trait of the middle child. We often think about the firstborn being the most ambitious and get ahead. But look at statistics and you'll see that just like Jacob, the second-born in the family will often be the wealthiest. They may be the most successful in the family. And looking at history, we can see that that's played out throughout history. And Jacob, when he left Laban, he was not willing to leave anything behind. And when he asked him, Rachel spoke up and says, "No, why shouldn't we go with you? Our dad has already spent our inheritance. We don't have anything left here." And she, along with Jacob, realized the fairness of it all. So Jacob left with everything that he possessed. He was, not only did he have it, but as a middle child, he was not willing to see that anything that he had was lost. He was not willing to see that anything that he had was destroyed or harmed in any way. But going back home, he had to face something. He had to face his brother Esau. And Jacob tried to negotiate with Esau by offering him gifts. And he sent all types of gifts ahead of him. And when Esau finally saw him, yes, that there was that time, maybe not a forgiveness, but a time when they could get back together again. And whether it was through the gifts that Jacob sent or whether it was just time had healed some wounds, we don't really know. All we know was Esau said, "Come on back home." Jacob agreed verbally. But no, he did not follow Esau. He wanted to make sure that there was peace that remained in his household, and he did not want to live under the shadow of his brother any longer. Then Jacob did something else. As a second-born, as a middle child, vows are very important to them. The covenants that they make, and that's why they stay with their family so long throughout so much. He had made a promise to God. And he said, "God, if you'll do this for me, I will serve you. I'll come back, I'll worship you, and I'll give you. I'll give you the tithes, I'll give you the offerings." He's a second-born who wanted to do that. Maybe you're a second-born yourself, a middle child, and you've made some promises to God throughout your life. Know that God has not forgotten them, and maybe you're like Jacob. Maybe it's been 20 years or more since you made those promises, since your heart was stirred by God. It's not too late. Jacob, when he made that promise to God on his way to Laban's house, had no idea it would be 20 years later before he came back. But when he did, God was there. God spoke to him again. And maybe, whether you're a middle-born or a firstborn or a baby or even an only child, you spoke to God a long time ago, and God spoke to you. Know that what God said to you is still true because he can't go back on his word. And know that it's never too late to be like Jacob and to keep your promise to God.